Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Maloney, and I'm the National Convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. And I'm really delighted to welcome you all to our second webinar in Earth Economics Week, a lovely series of webinars hosted by the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AILA, the New Economy Network Australia, NENA, and Future Dreaming, small not-for-profit that Mary Graham, Ross Williams, myself and others have formed to share ecological knowledge across cultures and across places. Before I welcome you all properly, I'd like to share some slides with you, and particularly I'd like to acknowledge country. The buttons are working today. They've got a mind of their own. So yeah, welcome to this week. I hope that some of you were able to join us for a fascinating conversation last night with Helen Kopp-Nina, and it was our first annual memorial lecture for our dear friend Hayden Washington, who passed away 2.5 years ago. All of our sessions this week will be recorded, and you'll be able to find them on the AILA and NENA website by next week, and we'll send out a note when they're available. But I'd like to acknowledge country. I live, work and play on the beautiful lands of the Cubby Cubby peoples, and from my place I look out across the Glasshouse Mountains, which I understand are Juunjuwarra country. So I'd like to acknowledge that the First Nations peoples of this place, this beautiful continent, the first custodians have never given up their lands, have never ceded through treaty in any other way. It always has and always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to acknowledge the peoples who've cared for country since time immemorial, and the land itself, the spirit of the land, and all of the beautiful creatures that we live here with. Within AILA, NENA and Future Dreaming, and certainly for me personally, acknowledging country isn't just a few words. It means a deep, deep message for me, constant reminder of the country that we live on, the first peoples who have looked after it and can teach us so much, and the way that we need to rethink our relationship with nature inside the Western constructs that I was born into, and how we have to think in a decolonized or better way to live in relationship with country. And today's webinar is definitely going to share with us some really wonderful stories from different parts of the country to share some new insights into what it means to build economies that take the land into consideration, perhaps for some people in a very different way to they're used to, the way Westerners treat the economic system and land as property. So it's a bit of a tradition within our webinar series. If you'd like to pop in the chat whose country you live on, where you are, maybe even mention a plant or an animal that inspired you or made you happy today, please do put that in the chat. I can't help mentioning that I know a lot of us are very worried about Cyclone Alfred, which is moving towards where many of us live. So I guess I'd like to do a special call out of care and concern for all the peoples, but also the creatures who live with us. And we hope that this time next week, everyone's doing okay. So we'll see what happens. So today's webinar, Forever Industries, First Nations Approaches to Sustainable Economies. I'm so delighted to have Mary Graham, Glenn Woods and Mike Weiner join us. I'm going to read their bios in just a minute, but I'm going to have a quick sneak peek at what else is coming up this week. But I can't wait to hear today's discussions. So tomorrow we're going to have steady state economics, a discussion about, are they still relevant? I suggest the answer will be yes, they are still relevant. Because we've got some of the great guys from the Centre for a Steady State Economy, the New South Wales branch, will be joining us for a yarn about the early origins of ecological economics and steady state economics, and what that means in a world today that seems to be absorbed still by hyper-capitalism. Then on Thursday night, we're going to hear from one of the co-founders of the original We All Economy International Network. There are now We All projects and groups around the world, the wonderful Catherine Trebek. So do join us Thursday night if you can, and cyclones permitting. And then on Friday, the wonderful Mary Graham is back with myself and Anitra Nelson, where we're going to have a forward-looking yarn and perhaps a backward-looking informative yarn too, about what a degrowth, decolonised economy could look like. We'll be playing with some cool ideas, but also sharing some facts and figures about where you can read more about what challenging the current economic system looks like. So that's what we've got coming up. And very briefly, why Earth Economics? Well, if you booked in on the Humanities page, you'll have seen our little blurb, but really it is that we're facing a globalized economic system that's been driven by extractivism and expansion for many, many hundreds, if not thousands of years from the Western perception of what the economy is all about. And I always have to frame it because, we can't just say the economy has done this or that. Unique places, unique peoples, and different times have seen people do many different things. But whether you're worried about social justice or environmental degradation, the impacts of climate change, what we know is that the current economic system, which is held as some form of gospel amongst many governments and policymakers, is playing a huge part in destroying the living world. However, over the past 50 years, we have seen a range of really terrific ideas emerge through academic and scholarly works. I've mentioned a couple of them. That's why we've having them as events this week, looking at the steady state economic ideas about challenging the endless growth of neoclassical economics, and more common, more recent terms, donut economics, well-being, degrowth, so many different forms. And the reason that we're interested in exploring all of these very different ideas is that if we're going to forge a better pathway forward, then there's some terrific thinking out there. And I personally feel that some of the best thinking anywhere in the world is happening here in Australia by a lot of our Indigenous First Nations colleagues who are reflecting on and drawing from the deep custodial practices that have existed on this continent since time immemorial. And there's so much that is informing current work and so much that's sharing some really fantastic ways of thinking about caring for country and looking after the joint. So without further ado, just a brief introduction. Today we'll have Glenn speak with us first. Glenn is the CEO of the Martuwarra Fitzroy River Council, and he works with Anne Polina, who anyone who has been connected with Ayla or Nina over the last 10 years knows that we've invited Anne many a time to come join us. Today, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Glenn about some of the discussions, some of the work that they're doing up in the Kimberley. And yeah, what Anne has often said is building forever industries, which I think is a fantastic idea. We'll then be joined by Mike Weiner, who's doing some amazing work with folks up in the north of Queensland. And we did reflect on how strange it was to have cyclone warnings and concerns in southeast Queensland while everyone in Cairns is relaxed. So I think it's definitely their turn to chill out and not be too stressed while we concern ourselves with the day-to-day. And look, it goes against protocol in many ways, having an elder speak last. When Mary and I were chatting, what we were interested in was having Mary reflect on some of the information that Michael and Glenn are going to share and really share her amazing insights, particularly from the relationalist ethos point of view, and her other reflections on the kinds of practical work that's being done all around this continent and what it means for the future building of a different economic system, I hope, in Australia. So what I might do now is invite Glenn. I will do the Zoom thing and spotlight you, Glenn, so everyone can see you without trying too hard. And I'm going to dip out of the way. Glenn's going to yarn for about 15 minutes, and then we'll hand over to Mike, and then we'll come back to Mary. Then we'll all have a chat. And if you have questions, please do pop them in the chat as we go along. We'll just be reading out the questions at the end and trying to group them together in case there's a lot of them and we want to manage them. Oh, and someone's saying hello from, oh, look at all that. There's some people all around the world, including in Belgium. So thank you to everyone across Australia and those who are joining us in other places. It's truly wonderful to have you all with us. And Glenn, how are you today? Are you okay? I know I'm anxious. Are you anxious?
A little anxious, yeah. I think more about the rain than just the cyclone event and the wind. But yeah, as people might remember, we had huge floods, down here in 2022, and again huge floods up in the Kimberley the next year. But the recovery from the 2022 flood in this region, the Tweed, where I'm at now, hasn't really finished, and there's still a lot of things unresolved and a lot of people not housed properly and all that kind of thing. So in the face of another catastrophic flood, there is a lot of anxiety, I think, in the region.
No, I
Understand.
really feel for you. All right, so I'm going to not duck off. I will stop being visible and hand over to you, Glenn, to share with us your thinking about the forever industries and the work that you wonderful folks are doing up in the Kimberley.
No worries. Thanks, Michelle. Michelle, I'm wondering if you do have that screen shot or that share. I do have it up on my other screen. I'm not sure if it's not going to come up on your share, maybe.
Well, what I've got, so Glenn they've got a wonderful map, really fantastic map. But I don't know what's going on. My internet's a bit slow. I apologize. But I will put livingwaterheritage.org in the chat for you all to have a look at. And this map can show you stuff that Glenn's going to speak to. But I also, just for those who don't know where the Kimberley is, I've brought up this non-exciting, non-static, non-movable map, which shows you the Kimberley region is defined in different ways by different people. It's up in the top left of Australia. I'll now keep this one up for you if that's of any help, Glenn. But do tell me if you want something else brought up.
No worries. And yeah, I do have the same map on my other screen with the catchment and the river, but I don't know if it would work for me to share that or whether it's even worth having a go. It does help help a lot if you can see the catchment and the river, but have I got sharing options, Michelle?
Yes, you absolutely do.
I
If
just
you've got two screens, though, it can be quite an art form. So good luck with that.
maybe
Hang on.
I'll just leave it. I'm scattered enough as it is today. So, but anyway, um, yeah, my bio I think is also in the information, but just quickly, I'd like to acknowledge I'm on Bundjalung country today, and that's just south of the Queensland border. So my home and where I live or where I've been living most of my life is on Bundjalung country in the Bundjalung Nation. But I'm working at the moment. I've been going back and forth to the Kimberley for a long, long time and done various things over in the Western Kimberley region. So the Martuwarra, which is the Fitzroy River, as it's otherwise known. The Martuwarra is in the Western Kimberley region, and it originates in the Rock Country up in the Western Kimberley, and the catchment is an area that's probably about the size of Victoria. So it's a huge catchment with a massive delta, seasonal delta that comes out at near Derby, the King's Sound area. So the Martuwarra is one of the last wild rivers in Australia and is globally significant for all sorts of reasons. And so just quickly, in terms of background of what we do or who we are, so Martuwarra Fitzroy River Council was started by, as mentioned already, Dr. Anne Poelina, or Professor Anne Poelina, or Anne, as you might otherwise know her. So Martuwarra was started by Anne on the back of really, I think, on the back of the James Price Point campaign to resist gas wholesale extractive industry activity in that part of the Kimberley. Martuwarra Fitzroy River Council is essentially a coalition of traditional owner groups, coming together of traditional owner groups of representing about 8 different traditional owner groups in the Western Kimberley and who have connection to Martuwarra through that catchment. It's unique in that way. It's a very unique organisation in terms of how it's come together and who has brought it together and who sits with it. So we have all that traditional ownership on our board and on our executive. My role as the CEO is a new one been there about 12 months now. So we've grown, and we've grown as a result of support and activity, support from people who recognise the importance of protecting Martuwarra and supporting the communities who live, for and from Martuwarra country. And we also have developed over the last couple of years a very significant research profile as well, where we prioritise First Nations approaches to research and conservation. And there's been a lot of interest and enthusiasm in partnering with us from a lot of different sectors, a lot of different stakeholders. particularly, or notably from some of the larger conservation groups, and also from state and federal government. So, in terms of what we're focused on right now, I think there's from my perspective, there's three sort of angles, or three sort of things that are our top priorities. As I mentioned, one is that process of research and researching. I should say too, in terms of the organisation and what we represent, we're also very clear from Martuwarra Fitzroy River Council that we're operating from a first law value, philosophical and values base in terms of what we do and why we do it. And that includes, presenting and bringing forth first law from country as a very viable alternative to regional engagement, shared regional management. As we're presenting it as a very viable and sustainable option for regional governance and management, as that could be done anywhere across the continent. So, in saying that, we have about three key focus areas right at the moment. One of those is research that I've already talked about, and that's research with various sort of focuses. That country is very hard. It's not publicly accessible for most people. So a lot of researchers are very keen to get involved. There's very unique, globally unique ecosystems, fauna, flora in the area. So there's a lot of enthusiasm, particularly from ecologists and hydrologists, people who are, within the environmental sciences. There's also research that is critical research that needs to be done about the potential impacts of activity that, that there's a lot of pressure on in the Western Kimberley, particularly extractive industries. So in terms of research, we're researching what's there, what we need to protect, and also what could be, the risks involved in certain activities. So in a sense, it dovetails into one of our other focus areas, which is being, custodians of country, being guardians and protectors of country and community. And there's an increasingly large threat to the Western Kimberley, and in general, we're kind of seeing this northern move up from the Pilbara in terms of extractive industries, the interest in and the push for extractive industries, and that now includes water as an extractive industry. So a lot of people would readily understand mining and fracking, gas extraction, but the latest and sort of big pressure on country there is water extraction, and I can talk a bit more about that too at some point. But so the resistance to that and the gathering of allyship and support for resisting that is one of our other jobs. The campaigning of that, the reaching out to and the sort of educating around that. And the third sort of focus we have, which is probably the most specifically relevant to what we're talking about today, is that development of alternatives to those, short-term extractive industry options of just getting on and, taking what you can and not thinking about the consequences socially, environmentally, spiritually. So, that third focus is about how do we develop economies that engage and empower all those groups of people, including non-Indigenous people that live in that catchment and beyond. So we're very, very aware that, our first law tells us that we're to be inclusive and that we're all connected and we all have a responsibility to be part of this. So we're certainly not ignoring the fact that there's non-Indigenous families and, people living in this catchment too. They're our neighbours, they're our friends, they're sometimes our family members as well. So yeah, we're very focused as a priority on looking at what we can do as an alternative to, getting involved with those industries. People might know from the Territory and from the Pilbara, There's one of the ways that people have managed to do deals or to engage with extractive industries on country, and it's probably important to also get a bit of a understanding that all this country is, well, most of the country we're talking about in this huge catchment is pastoral lease. It's also under native title comprehensively. So we have a very complex socio-political, legal system up there, and as yet some still as yet unresolved issues around what it means to have native title over pastoral lease. And one thing we do know for sure from the legal and political perspective, the rights of First Nations people have always been, in that legal space, considered and operated against as subservient to the pastoral industry and certainly subservient to mining. So there's kind of a three-tier hierarchy in this part of the world. It's extractive industries at the top, then the pastoralists, then traditional owners with native title. So that's a huge issue in itself. And that's something too we're very mindful about, needing to educate people about. So in terms of that economic model, I think, there's some of the more familiar approaches that we're seeing take, particularly around conservation and land management. So we have a small workforce that we've developed. At the moment, it's about 9 people, and we refer to those people as river keepers. And our river keepers are engaged in all sorts of things. They do a lot of activity or a lot of sort of work that would be considered ranger type work. And people may be aware that, the Indigenous ranger programs have been some of the most successful, employment and training and economic support industries right across the country. It's been and really it should be no surprise that, when people are given the opportunity to care for country and to be able to sustain themselves as individuals and families, it tends to work pretty well. So that is a very attractive option for people. Our river keepers we also recognise that we want to support and allow our river keepers to develop in ways that they choose as well in terms of directions and careers. So whilst we have a lot of the conservation type work and environmental management, we also have things like developing journalism skills, developing research skills, and that kind of thing. So we try and give people a very broad skill set and allow that to help determine where they want to take, their activity in terms of engaging in employment, working with different stakeholders and that kind of thing. So right at the moment, that's one of our, one of our sort of economic models. And I guess what we're saying in that is that one of the big challenges in this part of the world, it's an incredibly, it's, people talk about it being remote from, that's it, Michelle. Okay, Michelle's just put the map back up, which is great. So yeah, you can see in that map the dark blue, and with all the tributaries and the main stream which runs out in King Sound near Derby. Those dark blue is the actual Martuwarra with all the tributaries, and the shaded area in blue is the total catchment area. So it's a bit hard to get a sense of it, but when you zoom out, you can see that it's a massive catchment. So I guess the point being is right now we have a huge area of land that is globally significant for all sorts of reasons. It's incredibly significant for the people who call that part of the world home. And we have very, very little conservation and active conservation and land management happening. Pastoralism has, without a doubt, been more destructive than productive in terms of country and the well-being of country and the communities that live off country. So there's a huge amount of work to do around the ongoing prevention of damage on country. There's already irreparable damage done, and we have to work out ways that we can deal with that and live with that. But what we want to do more than anything is stop further irreparable damage. So I guess it comes, a lot of the work we look at would come under the broad banner of conservation, I guess, and land management from a, broad sort of mainstream way of talking about it. But in saying that, there's a huge amount of connected work. So we also look at the socio-cultural work as well, which I wouldn't, I don't like to attach the word industry to that kind of work. It's part of it. It's certainly part of, well-being is an important part of economy. So in terms of, if we were just to sort of limit it to conservation and land management, just that would be enough to employ anyone to do that well and to do that in a reasonable way. So we have a reasonable idea about, what's happening on country, what needs to happen, and the very practical and physical work that needs to be done. Even if we just focused on that, there would be work for everyone in that region, ongoing. It's a small population. And so we have a huge demand for that work. We also have a huge demand for social and cultural based work as well, which is an area that we're really just touching on in the scope that we're able to have right now. So I'm not sure if that's enough for now, Michelle, but
Yes, that's wonderful, Glenn. Thank you so much. We're starting to get questions already. Thank you, everyone. We'll collate them and have them at the end when everyone's spoken. Just one quick question for clarification purposes, Glenn. A lot of folks may not know what first laws are. Did you want to just explain a little bit about how you and Anne and others in your region refer to that term?
yeah, okay. So when we refer to that term, people use the word culture very broadly, and it tends to be, people often see, culture through just some of the most obvious surface level artifacts of that culture or expressions of that culture. And when we talk about first law, we're talking about our ancestral heritage, what we've inherited from our ancestors that tell us and show us and instruct us how to live on country, how to live in ways that, maintain the way I would, the way I personally see it, that it's a way of living and in learning about how to live and, instructions about how to live in ways that we may not even fully understand as people. I think, sometimes we get very caught up in this sort of intellectualization of everything, and we sort of believe we can understand everything as well. And the way I see it, first law is bigger than us. It's the entirety of our ancestral knowledge over forever time. And so it's huge, important knowledge, and it's the knowledge that's kept things balanced and kept things sustainable for so long. The periods of time that we all understand have gone on. So, and those first laws are not historic. They're not something that changed automatically at the time of colonization. First law has been there forever, and it's been held by people ever since. So it's about how to live, it's about how to be human, but it's about how to be on human with everything else. That's just, I guess, off the top of my head, that's the
Yeah.
way we see it. And it's also, we're also saying it's a viable underpinning for a governance, management and governance system regionally that can include everyone and does include everyone. It's open to everyone to participate and engage with that process.
Thank you, Glenn. That's wonderful. And certainly when we come back to discussions amongst the three speakers, we'll be picking up on that. Perm and Mary's use of similar terms to explain the governance systems underpinning all of this work. So thank you so much, Glenn. Don't go away. I'll now put the spotlight on Mike and we'll get his slides up, and I'll let you recede into the background, Glenn, and keep thinking about anything else you need to do, but we'll get you back in just a minute. Okay, and hello, Mike. And I realize I do apologize. I didn't actually read out a proper intro from the bios that were on the humanities one. So thank you, Mike. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
That is good. So I'm just going to look back for a moment. So I should have said Glenn Woods. I said he's the CEO of Martuwarra Fitzroy River Council in the Western Kimberley. He's an educator and researcher committed to supporting and understanding an uptake of an Indigenous approach to professional practice. And he's worked across education and training spaces and done a PhD focusing on the decolonization of education. And Glenn shared with us the work that he's doing in his new role or newer role as CEO up north. And Mike, I'll now introduce Mike. Mike Weiner is a mentor to the Juunjuwarra Aboriginal Corporation up in the Starcke River, Cape York. He moved to Cape York after coordinating forest campaigns for the Wilderness Society in the 80s. And in the 90s, he was influential in bringing working with others up in Cape York, but bringing the Black Green Alliance together that resulted in the acquisition of over 6 million hectares of pastoral leases that were converted to national park and Aboriginal freehold. And Mike has also led a whole range of corporate partnership projects with Indigenous groups. And I know that Mike is now going to talk to us today about a little bit of all of it and with some practical stories from the Juunjuwarra gang and what they're up to. So I will get out of the way. And if you could aim for 15 minutes, Mike, that'd be great. And then we'll hand over to Mary to reflect on some of these issues. So let's see how your screen sharing goes. And I can help if you need. Okay, we can see the big slide on the right and the little ones on the left. And if with two screens, if it's too hard to shift, don't worry. We can look at the big one on the right. It's all good.
How's that?
Still the same, but that's okay. No one minds.
Well, it's looking right on mine.
Yeah, it's when you have two screens that makes life tricky, and I'm afraid I can't talk you through it.
Sorry, I'll just bear with me 1 sec. I'll just try to. Does it work now?
No, it's still the same for me. Is it the same for you, Sarah? Oh, now it's working. Well done, Mike.
Right. I turned off the other screen, so I'm going to have to squint at some of the tiny writing.
That's right. You're now tiny on our screen, so squint away. No one will notice.
On my screen. So look, thank you very much, Mary, Michelle, Ayla. Great opportunity to come and talk to people about sustainable economies and hopefully support some of the great work you're doing in this chaotic period of humanity and the fast advance of climate change. So we've got to find these new ways of dealing with the economy. So Juunjuwarra Aboriginal Corporation represents 200 of course, I should pay my respects to the elders and traditional owners of Bramson Beach, where I'm talking from. I'd also like to recognise them from all the sites where your viewers are viewing today, and pay special respects, of course, to my Juunjuwarra elders and traditional owners, past and present, who I'll be talking about today. Just from a little bit of context and where Juunjuwarra is working, I've been out and floating around. I worked with Juunjuwarra in '92 to get their land back. And then I've sort of been orbiting around in all this national stuff and corporate social responsibility and land and sea management and environmental services and all those sorts of things. And what I've been doing with Juunjuwarra after a group of young people came and asked if I'd come and help them get back onto their country, because after the purchase of the Juunjuwarra estate, and I'll explain that, not much happened. And a group of young leaders came and asked if I'd come and help them. And what I've been doing over the last 3 years is applying a lot of my national and international learnings and networks to one clan group. And it's been really, really interesting taking it right back to that grassroots level and looking at how do you enable people to save themselves and to save their country and to save their land. And that's been at the core of the development of Juunjuwarra Aboriginal Corporation and the strategies that we're operating under. But we're working within a broader context of the Indigenous land ownership scape, where you know, Indigenous people now own, under sort of good title, freehold title and stuff, about 20% of Australia, mostly in the top end and the central desert areas. And then have native title over all of Australia, whether it's formally claimed yet or will be claimed at some stage. But what's happening at the moment is 70% of all new conservation areas are coming off that 20% that is Aboriginal land. So there's quite an inequitable burden of conservation and development on Indigenous people, and we're facing it at a micro level at Starcke. And the other thing that it's sort of like this, getting caught in this pincer of developers, of miners and loggers and crabbers and those sorts of things, versus the new push for protecting 30% of the planet by 2030, and the huge push for conservation under sort of Western laws. So we're sort of working in this sort of pretty crowded context. But the key to it is how do we enable a group to just get on with what they need to do to build their own sustainable economy amongst, you know, all these different pressures and chaos? How do we focus people 80% of just getting their country operating versus, you know, getting embroiled in all the politics? Anyway, Juunjuwarra, they're the traditional owners of about 50,000 hectares of land north of Hopevale. It takes in a whole water catchment of the Starcke River. So they're in a unique position of being the owners of an entire water catchment of the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area. And through that catchment, of course, the stories help dictate how that land should be managed, and what can and can't happen on that within the stories here, that are held within this fantastic brand that the Juunjuwarra crew have put together, dictate, I guess, or guide people on country, and whether that's Barra, the mangrove, which connects the high country to the sea and tells the story of all the sea creatures, whether it's Echidna Hill and the Bora grounds, or whether it's Mundu and the sacred lagoons, which Juunjuwarra, as part of their development process, and the top priority for them moving back onto country, is to reinvigorate and reactivate the healing waters of Mundu. The landscape within that 50,000 hectares and then way out to sea and out to the outer reefs is really remarkable. There's 10, what we call a habitat cascade. There's 10 quite remarkable habitats that are all interconnected. And when I come around, I'll try and be really quick, but this will sort of explain also some of the economic opportunity that sits within the Juunjuwarra estate. And there's no shortage of opportunity. There's no shortage of wealth, resource wealth, environmental wealth, habitat wealth, food, medicine, and all those sorts of things. And it's all contained within these 10 interconnected habitats, starting at the very remote highland rainforests that are very unexplored by modern science, through to the escarpments that drop down to the coastal plain, which has a very large wetland of about 5,000 hectares, that sits behind some literal rainforests, rare literal rainforests and beaches, that back salt pans and the largest mangrove system on the east coast of Australia, which then fronts the largest seagrass beds on the east coast of Australia, with the largest remaining breeding northern herds of dugongs, and out to the islands and reefs. So it's got this fantastically remarkable landscape. And Juunjuwarra have only been back on country for 3 years, so we're sort of babes in the wood in some ways, but people have been dreaming and thinking and knowing what they want to do on their country forever. So we can supercharge that by building people from the inside out, one at a time. The Juunjuwarra got their land back in 1993 after a a joint campaign with the Wilderness Society. I set up the Wilderness Society branch, and this actually set up the whole land acquisition program for Cape York, which was mentioned. There's about 7 million hectares now that's returned, and it goes through a state land dealing process. So people have the landscape and the vast areas of relatively undamaged land, although climate change is starting to hammer it pretty hard. And so if we're truly going to build a sustainable economy, it's a fantastic space to do it on, both from the cultural point of view, the law point of view, the LOR point of view, and the fact that it is intact. And so the opportunity to try and learn from all the mistakes surrounding us is very real. What we found is to enable people remote area, or to enable Juunjuwarra, I should really just talk about Juunjuwarra, to go and move back onto their country. We really needed 3 key ingredients. One was a core leadership team. And we put James Fazio, the Torres Strait Island leader, onto the young team of young leaders for 2.5 years before we actually progressed doing anything else, because we felt we really needed some strong leaders to lead Juunjuwarra back onto country under their own terms. People that weren't going to be shifted and moved around. The other thing is we needed really good governance, and their governance was terrible, Mary. And I see governance as an absolute crucial link into creating these types of economies, because to create these sorts of economies, we need stability, we need clear thinking, and we need fairness and equity. And that only comes with good governance. So we invested a lot of time up front for the whole first year, getting the board functioning really well, but also putting in LORE next to each of the LAW requirements that are required by ORIC to run a corporation under the land trust laws, the native title laws, and all that sort of thing. We've got reams and reams and books of Western rules and laws, but Juunjuwarra will respect their own law on top. And so to get that governance working really well, we needed to do a parallel LORE. And we're even doing it with the HR documents, putting in the traditional LORE on health and safety and principles around work ethics and all those sorts of things. And the governance, I just can't say how important, and how many Indigenous groups I've worked with, whether it be on economic development, business development, or ranger programs, get the governance right and you sail. So we spent a year doing that. And then finally we needed a work-ready team. And we had a whole lot of little projects with partner groups, so Cape York NRM and South Catchments and Nailsma and stuff. And that gave us enough work to get a really good work team operating. And from that, we put together a sustainable homeland plan. And with those foundation things, good governance, a core work team, and leaders that will lead under Juunjuwarra terms for Juunjuwarra people. So we currently, fast forward 2 years, and the supercharging is permitted by good governance. Because Juunjuwarra are heavily impacted by closing the gap issues, by intergenerational trauma, by poverty. We sometimes call it like we're working in amongst poverty chaos, where simple things like no one having a car to get to work, simple things like the rangers can't go because there's no food in the fridge and they've got to go to shopping in Cooktown before they can head off up onto country so that their families are fed. The fact that every day at least one of our workers is at the hospital or taking a family member to the hospital, or one of our rangers has gout and can't walk. It's that fundamentally complicated just to get people on country doing a bit of ranger work, let alone mobilising enterprise. So the foundation of creating a sustainable economy, for me, comes from building the people from the inside out first, one at a time. and then enabling those people one at a time to throw the rope back to a family member, to a child, to an uncle, to an auntie, to one of the other clan. How do we enable a small team to become a bigger team, to become a bigger team through enabling each other? Because Juunjuwarra know what they want. They know what businesses they want to build. They know what their priorities are on country. They know what their cultural law is, and that they know who's sick. They know who's not doing well. They know who's drinking too much. How do we enable the clan? How do we enable the village of Juunjuwarra to move forward? And that way, they will create their own economy. And at the core of it is creating jobs. And so the first foundational piece, sorry, I'm just up to 15 minutes, so I'll whiz past, is really about creating jobs. I'll just whiz past this, but the other thing that we needed to do on Starcke was get rid of lawlessness. This shows those little flag sites, 52 illegal campsites just at the one river landing. We've got miners scraping around all over the country. The whole place is covered in exploration leases. We've got 2 illegal fishing camps that have destroyed about 20 hectares of literal rainforest, burning wrong and things like that. But within that mess, we've got evidence of long-term habitation, scar trees, bush food trees in high densities. They did not just grow there accidentally. The literal rainforests are predominantly planted by Indigenous people. And we see that in the high densities of middens and the high density of food trees. And this comes back to, well, what sort of businesses do we create? What sort of businesses? You've got to build businesses from inside the person out, what they're good at, what they know, what they understand. That is how we build this, not thinking, oh, there's an opportunity to do tourism. Oh, there's an opportunity to do crabs. Oh, there's an opportunity to do this or that. Juunjuwarra know, they walked through here and spotted every one of these trees. Wild harvest is an obvious progression, and that will be one of the first enterprises. And as we replant that 20 hectares, they're going to be Johnny apple seeding like their ancestors did, and ensuring high densities of these bush food and medicine trees are there, and enough not just for themselves, but to wild harvest commercially. This is just some of the huge damage that was done in amongst the literal rainforest with the roads, the rubbish, the cutting of firewood, the team on country. Starcke has one of the most productive fisheries on the whole east coast of Australia because of those big mangroves and big wetlands and big this and big that. But we've got massive problems, and climate change is coming like a train wreck at us. 25% of the mangroves are dead. Other mangroves are pushing back into salt pans. The place is just moving and shifting like you would not believe. I won't go too into this.
Yeah.
Huge turtle and dugong populations. So if I come down to the guts of it and building a sustainable future and a sustainable economy, it's based in law and law. And one of the things Neil Jacko, our chair, always says is, mate, when I go on country, when I'm working on country, when I'm sitting on country, I listen, and the country tells me what it needs. And our ancestors tell us what we need. And that's formed the foundation of our planning processes. We've got these core sort of job projects, which is the Ranger program, State Ranger program, a fantastic cultural program of bringing back cultural observation. People being on country, seeing, smelling and living their country, and using that as actual scientific data points for scientists and getting paid to do that. We've got scientists that go in and look at the wetland and study the water quality for 3 years, and then Junju go in there for 5 minutes and have a look, and they both come to the same conclusion. The water's muddy and it's pigs. As we build a sustainable future, what's really getting exciting is our clan-based leadership program. So all generations doing a leadership program that interconnects between the youth, the workers, the elders. Good governance, good governance, good governance. Cultural governance that meets Western requirements under law, LAW, but built off LORE. The work-ready team. And to build enterprises from inside the person out, not just, hey, here's the enterprise opportunity. What are you good at? What do you want to do? Is there a market for it? And building off people's strengths. As we move into the next year, we're going to be consolidating our on-country work and starting to plant the seeds for enterprise. At the moment, we're 95% government funded. We want to drop that to 49% over the next 3 years. And that's very ambitious, whether it's 3 or 10, I'm not sure. Starting with those jobs we've got around rangers, caretakers and wild harvest and health. But as we're fixing the lagoons and the 12-mile wetlands and improving the biodiversity in them, can we increase the wild harvest and sell some of it for profit, be it fish, magpie geese, bush foods and medicines? We've got a huge feral pig and cattle problem. We're going to be killing 500 cattle and probably 1,000 pigs over the next year. How can we make that a food supply for the Juunjuwarra and sell the excess? We've got fire and carbon, biodiversity services and offsets with those 10 cascades. The biodiversity buyers are salivating at the opportunity of that story. But there's a lot of ifs and buts within that market. A small cattle herd, and we need to put in some basic camping to get the illegal campers out of the illegal areas. Sorry, I've gone just a bit over. Could talk about this stuff for days and days, but I think really at the foundation, it comes down to the people being healthy and well. We think of economic development, we think of land and sea management, we think of conservation. Without healthy people, none of that will happen. The poverty chaos will keep pulling people back into the bucket. And the other thing is governance, governance, governance.
Thank you, Mike. That was fantastic. If you're able to stop sharing just as successfully as you shared, then that would be a technological marvel. Thank you so much, Mike. Voila! No, that was terrific. And yeah, thank you so much. We'll definitely come back. I already have questions for you. I'll just remove your spotlight for a moment. And Mary, would love to bring you. Hang on, here we go. Now, Mary Graham, I know a lot of people in our networks already know you, but let me just introduce you very briefly. So folks, oh, hang on, just controlling my buttons. I won't read what we've got there. I've lost all my screens. Mary Graham is an adjunct professor at the University of Queensland, and she is a Kombumerri person from the Yugambeh language-speaking peoples in what is now the Gold Coast. And Mary will obviously introduce herself in whatever way she wishes. But for many of us who work with Mary, what I think we and deeply, deeply admire is her many decades of work exploring how Indigenous governance systems and the relationalist ethos can actually inform all of the other ways of doing and being in this continent. And yeah, Mary, I'd love for you to share any reflections you have on the stories that have just been shared with us, or even if you wanted to start by introducing people to, you know, the work you do on helping folks understand the governance systems that existed and continue to exist here in Australia. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much for that. Gee, I'm just so overwhelmed by Glenn and Michael.
Mike.
Yes. Yeah, what you were both talking about, I'm just really overwhelmed. I think it's wonderful. I was taking notes all the way through what you both have been saying. I have to say straight off, I'm not I don't know much about economics, but in a practical kind of way, even though I come from here, from this urban tourist place, the Gold Coast, a great example of how not to do development, you know, for everybody around the country, or anyone. But first of all, I'd just like to introduce myself properly. Mary Graham, this is my father's place here on the Gold Coast, my father's traditional place, the Yugambeh language-speaking people, and I'm a member of the Kombumerri, one of half a dozen big family clan groups here. On my mother's side, she was Waka Waka, from about a couple of 100 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, a place she used to call Baramba, which is now called, it's a reserve run by Aboriginal people now, but still connected to state government. Cherbourg, it's called. So she was there for a long time, under the Act, as they say in Queensland. But my father's mob weren't under the Act. They weren't. So our lot here on the Gold Coast, that's where I really grew up, and they very early on they came into doing some business, actually understanding about whitefellas business. They're making being independent. They ran an oyster company, oystering company, and the usual thing a lot of cultural Aboriginal people living on coastal areas, going, selling fish, catching fish for your own mob. Of course, everybody could do that, and crabbing and going to get oysters and sell them and so on and so on. So they learned to be fairly independent in a individual group. Collective way for their own mob, sharing things out, but then selling to white shops, fish shops, and cafes and restaurants and things like that. So, but as for, again, a group-based idea of doing far more development, proper development, community development, as in economic development, and in other ways, like for having our own actual fair-sized businesses. We have our own organisations, but basically service organisations. But we do have other different kinds of organisations, setting up a research body, looking at a whole range of things, as far as, especially as you were saying, Michael, about governance. That's my own favourite thing, looking at governance and how to work very hard on terms of reference, Aboriginal terms of reference. And I like what you were saying about first law, second law. I understand that from also from talking with Michelle about law. I learned a whole lot from other Aboriginal friends of mine, Professor Irene Watson. She's a law professor on both Aboriginal and Western law from South Australia University, but also a whole lot of historical things to do with law from Michelle, which she'll talk about later, I think. The idea of first law, as I understand it, exactly like from the Aboriginal point of view, that but the other way I explain it, because I've always been interested in philosophy to itself and logic and things like that. And there's an old-fashioned term about metaphysics. All it means is metaphysics, meaning above and outside of anything physical in a way. Your ideas, I think you mentioned it before, somebody did from first law, your ideas and beliefs and spirits and things, basically, in a way, things you can't actually see. But for our purposes, our original viewpoint, it comes from the physical, of course, from the land. So the idea of land being the source of the law, both LAW and LORE, that's our invention, if you like, our background in thinking. And unfortunately because when Europeans came here, English, and they haven't been here for a very long time, they have yet to develop a metaphysical identity. They don't even ancient cultures from other places around the world, they have a metaphysical identity, developing thinking about what creation is, and God or gods, and so on, spirit figures and so on. But this country is a state, and it has only been a state, modern Australia, for the last slightly over 200 years. So they've got a long way to develop themselves in a deeper sense. So, and they're very lucky they couldn't have been in the right country with the right people to learn all of this, and many of them are, and that's good. but the full meaning of what that means. So as far as an economy goes, economics and that, I try really, I don't work at the university anymore, but I'm trying also to encourage a lot more younger Aboriginal students to do economics, not just accounting and bookkeeping and things like that, but the actual finding out how an economy, both local and global, and regional and so on, how it works, you know, and try to look at the how do you have a civilized economy, basically, you know. So the idea of having a community-centered economy is the right way, rather than an economy-centered community, you know, something that's based and centered on the economy. Because when people talk about it, if you go way back, you know, to historical figures too, that has almost overtaken economics, and of course technology and science has taken over from any kind of religious or spiritual idea. It runs everything, you know, the economy globally, you know. And tied up thoroughly with that is colonialism. I always see it as it's not just a few centuries old. I see it as about 1,000 years old, starting with the what do I call it? Heavens. What do you call that? Going over to the Middle East. What's the word?
What's happening to Palestine? Genocide?
Yeah. Now, what did they call it? A long time ago? You know, the old. Does anybody know that? Oh, yeah, there, Crusades. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
Crusades.
you. My
Yes.
gosh. Yeah, Crusades, you know. And those Arab people, they still call whitefellas Crusaders, you know. It's interesting. But it started out with taking over another country, but in the religious style. So an old pope tells all the Europeans, go over there and get that country back, because that's where the Christian thing came from, and so on and so on. It wasn't very successful. But from that, they seem to have got, because the timeline, when you look at the timeline, when the crusading, actual crusading war type activity stops about the 1300s, in the 1300s, straight away in the 1300s, early 1400s, they start visiting or taking over in their sailing ships other countries far around the world, other side of the world. They set off. And the main thing, of course, is to control, own and capture and own forever the resources of those countries. And if it meant mass killing, you know, mass killing, genocide and so on, that's what they did. And that's what they've been doing ever since, of course, because it's still going on over there, isn't it? You know, it is, you know, you could see it as a straightforward economic war, really, to get rid of the Indigenous people from that place, have a final Palestinian final solution, take over the country and make money out of it, you know. So the basic rules of colonialism have not stopped, and they will never stop, actually, in my own view. They don't. All we can do is exactly what we're doing, and what you both were talking about there, about how to look after our land and our people first of all. So the idea of stewardship is extremely important, and I was looking at trying to try and explain it in a real a short way, basically. So our idea, our action really, and our way of living is a sacralized, ecological, collaborative, self-regulating stewardship system. So it's not necessarily religious, because it doesn't believe in any kind of hierarchy, spiritual hierarchy, or what's the name, hierarchy, physical. Okay, so it's a different governance, and no kings and queens and things like that. So, but the essential thing is looking after land, first of all. There's an old saying, I might be familiar with, other people, look after country, look after kin. It's a general saying that everybody seems to have, know and understand and feel, and so on. So look after land first, and then look after people, because once you're looking after the land properly, that's the impression I've always got from my family, over the many years, and other Aboriginal people as I've travelled around. look after country. It's sort of like training on the job for having an ethical space, having an ethical approach, or conscience, if you like, building up a conscience. You look after something outside of ourselves, but that we come from, and that tells us how to look after people. So, and it's a brilliant old system, because it is the pathway to stabilizing a stable culture for eons of time, So what we learned from land relationalism, it looks after us, we look after it, it looks after us. And so great reciprocal relationship. After a while, it clicks after, maybe a couple of tens of thousands of years for us, but not yet for many other people, many other cultures, is that that's where the meaning of life comes from, is this relationship with land, looking after it proper, that word of proper, I really like that as far as our own, having our own governance, exercising our own governance. Everything's got to be done in a proper way. And that doesn't mean hard line, punishing, moral authority, outrage, big. It means just what it says, proper. And that's different from survivalism. Survivalism is different, two different things. It's not either or. It's both. It's and. So ordinary survivalism is what everybody's used to, I don't know, at some point or another, an earthquake here, a volcano going off there, and you run for your life, basically. Or an animal wants to have you for dinner. You better start running very quick. That's the very basic survivalism. But survivalism turns into psychology, political, military, social, every other way too. And so instead of indulging in things like wars of conquest, we didn't. It's a foreign concept, wars of conquest. So you invade and take over somebody else's country. I've yet to come across a dreaming story like that. Plenty of fights, apparently, because we're human beings first. We're going to fight about something sooner or later, even us. And there are stories about different mobs fighting with each other, or individuals, or warriors, or whatever. But not to the point of invading your enemy. Having an enemy, yes, or for somebody who you don't love, but not taking over their land. So there doesn't seem to be, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong here, because it would take hundreds of years probably to do the research about if there's any Aboriginal word for invasion. There doesn't seem to be. But plenty of words for all kinds of conflict. They're also to do with no hierarchy, which is a very important thing in economics, who runs it. As we know, the billionaire class runs things. They're basically running things there. There doesn't seem to be any Aboriginal words for in language for servant or slave or anything like that. So we just simply didn't take up those notions. We had a much more highly sophisticated, quite elegant, I always think, system of stability right across the whole country. And that idea you're saying about governance, putting law right next to LAW, the two laws, I sort of opted out of arguments with different people, different Aboriginal people, some elders too, about no, it's not LAW, it's LORE, But we had to have rules, who killed who. I mean, what's going to happen? What's the rule about that? So putting them together seems, that's absolutely the right way of doing things. And the idea of working out governance and putting that all the way along, I thought that about something similar along the same lines, but something similar to whenever I come across the necessity of having a corporate following corporate rules, things like that. I used to think, well, why should we? We've been running a country for thousands of years. Why should we have this other system? We know how to run a country, actually. but anyway, for funding reasons, other lawful reasons, Western law reasons, we have to take those things up. But try really hard to have our own governance. So not a hierarchy, flat, men's business, women's business, all that sort of thing. A whole range of proper old required traditional requirements about how to run a community, how to run a country, how to look after country, and so on and so on. Leadership, we're just working that out now at the moment here with our lot. The Yugambeh, we call our own organisation, traditional owners, traditional custodians, Yugambeh a regional alliance, and we have our own museum with huge amounts of artifacts over the years. They're an old organisation, so we work in partnership. We're just working that out in more governance ways too, actually. So what's the other thing? We're our own old system of how we treat one another, based on that idea of relationalism and survivalism. So survivalism is it's a small scale and large scale. You've got to be careful crossing the road. You might get hit by a bus. That's basic, the most basic kind of survivalism, or the other one I was talking about before, natural crises. But survivalism is also where arguments break out over something. It might be something old, it might be something recent, it might be family stuff, tribal clan stuff. We're still going through this with all the faults of native title too. The damage that it's done to people. That's here, even in a place like this, native title clan. But what we worked out, which I think is again down to Aboriginal brilliance, is that people worked very hard historically, all the way through our lives, thousands of years, work very hard on relationalist ways of getting on with each other. And if ever some crisis happens, well, you use that as a counter to survivalist tendencies, warring and fighting. It counters that. So you depend on relationalist ways and very, very clever ways of how to manage fights and disagreements to do with
and human activities.
Activities and lessening the idea of fighting, competing, rivalry, things like that. Whereas in colonialism, they went straight into a full-on, and it's still there.
Mary, we might.
I'm sorry,
I think that's
going on.
No,
After
it's
a while,
perfect...
I start rambling on too.
Oh no, I can listen to you ramble all day. No, I'm just saying that idea of not competing and working together and working within that relationalist ethos is a great point to bring Mike back. Glenn's got his camera off, but Glenn, if you'd like to put your camera back on, I might spotlight you and bring you back. We've got about 10 or 12 minutes for some Q&A and just a bit of a yarn. So hang on, let me bring you back in. I've spotlighted the speakers, folks. So if you're used to using Zoom and you choose speaker or you can see the spotlight, you'll see the four of us. So Mary, thank you for those reflections. And I knew that you would really enjoy the discussions that the guys brought with them.
Both of you. It's just wonderful. I've made heaps of notes. I'll be bringing it up. In fact, both of those, would it be possible to get to see both of the videos? Is it?
Oh, absolutely. And Mary, I'm going to connect you with a lot more detail of their work.
With Wairaka. I'd love them to sit down and listen to both of you talking.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's the reason we build these webinars is for the audience and for folks to join and share, but also for speakers to get to know each other. So could I perhaps put a question to? There's a couple of questions from our groups. I might just a quick question to you, Glenn. And thanks for your patience. I know when you're on a panel and you're the first speaker and then you're kind of listening and you can almost forget what you've spoke about yourself. But there was a question from Simon about the kinds of employment opportunities that you're looking at in your part of the world, your community. And I might come back and Mike touched on quite a few of those opportunities in his part of the world too. But Glenn, what kind of sort of immediate employment and work things are going on in your world?
Yeah, thank you. And there's a lot going on that's really similar to what Mike outlined, which is probably no surprise. I talked about the work options. I mean, it's like I said, it's country that's had pastoral leases on it, for a long time. So there is probably work available and enterprise available, through that industry. But we've sort of been working with looking at the true value of economies, and whether they are in fact sustainable. And we've done some really in-depth analysis of the pastoral industry, and it's not sustainable. It's not making money. It's really just an industry I think, that's propped up heavily by government to maintain, Crown land, essentially. But so steering away from what people might take as a slightly more romanticized view of people working on pastoral leases, but working on country, repairing the damage from the pastoral industry, which is extensive, and in terms of its geographic scale, probably worse than mining in some regards. Just the scale of damage done. So the immediate, work on conservation, looking after country, getting country back into a healthy state. I mean, we've worked with Fire Stick Alliance to look at sustainable, what it means to burn country properly from a cultural, ecological perspective. If we were to engage in a comprehensive burning regime, we'd be looking at 50 to 100-year strategic plan for that. So all this requires labour, and expertise and presence. So just the conservation side of things is a huge. It's currently employing 9 of our rangers, but it's got scope to employ a lot more people. The other thing that I forgot to mention is that we've currently developed a river walk along 26 or so, a section of about 26 kilometres of the lower Fitzroy River, and we're just getting very close to being able to open that up for public engagement. So again, it's an exciting enterprise. It's a social enterprise that's going to be co-owned by a number of communities with Martuwarra's input, and we're sort of doing the finer details of how that's going to operationalize. But there's work there for people to host people on country, and we really encourage, again, some of our younger people. One of the most popular forms of sort of environmental tourism at the moment is long walks, taking people on multi-day walks. Tasmania's really boomed as a result of that, done really well, same as New Zealand. So the idea of multi-day walks, we need to train people on not so much around the aspects of country as around the aspects of engaging with the public and being a good guide, being an engaging guide. It's a very competitive space, the environmental tourism and space. So there's that. And beyond that, I think there's, just defining what work is. We often talk about having to work within Western constructs, and those Western constructs often tell us what work is and what work isn't. I think there's things that would get put down as just, sometimes seen as cultural or recreational activity that's actually work on country, maintaining relationships. Mike talked about that thing of a presence, being on country, the idea of people. There's similar situations up our way where a lot of people have been off country for quite some time, and some, because of those issues of economic marginalisation and essentially, quite extreme poverty under extreme circumstances in remote areas, a lot of people haven't had opportunity to reconnect with country. So the work, which is the work of well-being, we're also wanting our young people to train as facilitators on country for outdoor health type work. So bush adventure therapy type work, adventure therapy, on country therapy, green therapy, that kind of thing. So we're imagining a whole, a big picture for work, but immediately there's work that needs to be done absolutely right now in terms of community well-being, mental health, and conservation. They would be two huge areas, and monitoring as well.
Thank you, Glenn. That's great. Mike, any quick comments on that? Because then I've got a quick question for you and then a final question for all of you.
Yeah, look, it's sort of like how long's a piece of string? Like managing country is incredibly expensive and labor intensive. And we're getting country back that's pretty damaged with climate change sort of pouring in on top of it. And one of my big takeouts in Cape York is the government's never going to fund what's required for the management of these vast regions. We've got to mobilise the environmental services, and we've got to build matrices of enterprises that are soft on country or help heal country. And there's a lot of it. It's sort of like, shooting millions of feral pigs out of a helicopter and them rotting on the ground. Huge resource losses. We've got to monetize these things and make them help pay for the vast bill of managing country, let alone repairing it. And so we've got to get, I did a huge piece of research at the Cape York Institute about the theft of pretty much the carbon through the land clearance laws on Cape York, where the land clearance laws came in. There were no Aboriginal people with revving bulldozers to clear their land, but the government clocked up $9 billion worth of carbon off Cape York Aboriginal land off the back of the land clearance laws. And that's where we've got to get much more clever about how we do things, how we negotiate things, and how we negotiate conservation and the costs of conservation. And I think it's a big challenge for the environment movement because they've been part of the problem of that at times, not meaningfully, not, we all know good people, but we've got to work in, and
Yes.
I spent a week with Anita Roddick back in the 90s and had a profound moment with her. And she was the
founder of the Body Shop, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's the mother of corporate social responsibility and brought it into the world and was the inspiration of my setting up Jowan, which was a corporate social responsibility program. But I've met her, and Eartha Kitt was there too, of all people. Not meaning to drop too many names, but I was banging on about conservation and we've got to protect Cape York and we've got to get it back for the Aboriginal people and blah, blah. And they kept reverting back to the economy and saying, Nick, you've got to get the economy lined up right for this. And the big thing that Anita said is the global economy is like a tidal wave and it's coming at us all. And you ain't going to stop it. You got to learn how to surf it. And what I love about Ayla and you guys is you're learning to surf it. And so for me, it's about wrap it right back and do what we can as good civil society citizens and do the bit we can in our corner, but don't get drowned by the tidal wave or we get nothing done. And sorry, I'm sort of probably a bit all over the place on this, but to get the sort of funding required for these vast northern regions and the land and sea management that's expected now of Indigenous people, without the equity of economics and without the equity of conservation burden, we've just got to navigate this stuff really carefully and make sure that the real jobs and the real opportunities do emerge and they're not just patching up, that they're creating those long-term opportunities and they become part of the mainstream economy.
Thank you. No, that's very profound. I like the idea of being a surfer, given I'm one of the most clumsy people on earth, I think. Anyway, look, we're just about out of time. I do believe that we could all sit together for several days and with other colleagues and think all this stuff through. It's really powerful. And, as you all know, my purpose with some of the work we do is to bring the great ideas and the great work that people like Glenn and Mike and, of course, Mary bring, particularly to non-Indigenous folks who are grappling from looking at the problems from within the Western construct, but still looking for answers within Western constructs. And I personally feel that you can't use the master's tools to break the master's house, to use someone else's quote. And that's why I'm so passionate about first laws, because I personally, and I think our organisations would think that new ways forward in this country are terribly exciting, because we have the oldest continuous cultures on earth who have got some pretty remarkable, and as Mary said, metaphysical ways of connecting with place. And then, yeah, the economy is just the thing that humans shape around them as they do the things they're meant to do as good people. So, look, I'm going to give permission to anyone who needs to go, but I'll just perhaps with a final comment from all of you. I really loved that we talked about, and Glenn brought first laws into that context at the beginning, and Mary and Anne Paulina and everyone always talks about first laws. And could you perhaps just reflect on any final comments on how focusing on what people and country need, first laws, are the template for what human beings get up to? Was there any final comments on that, Glenn, about, I don't know, future projects you're doing, or, you know, how many of us who aren't Indigenous people can reflect on what country outside my window needs me to do as a person and as someone inside an economy?
It's a big question.
It is, I'm sorry.
I
1
have
minute or less. No.
I'm very optimistic that we all have an absolute capacity to tune into the intuitive knowledge about that question about what we need to do. I think we can all take a breath and clear our mind for half a second and ask that question. And I really think that if we ask that question and are prepared to listen to what's obvious about the answer, we'll all receive a very, similar sense of what we need to do. And I think the problem is then we start to then layer it with all sorts of complications and intellectualizations and all the various, prejudices we've been educated with as well, in terms of, whose systems are the most important and who has the, whose voices are the most important. And we're really at a point that's become incredibly obvious when you look at global politics right now and what's going on with the powerful nations, how absurd, those systems have become, how they're not serving us, how they're not serving, and climate change is, part of that, a lesson from that as well. So the easy answer, I think, is we've all got we all intuitively do know what needs to be done. And I think it's being brave enough to hear that voice and to, to look for leadership, as you said, look for leadership through people that understand it well and who have been using it as their guiding, light for a long time and continue to do so.
Wonderful, thank you. Mary, I might go to Mike and I'll let Mary have the final word. Yeah.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
Michael.
Oh, yeah, you go, Mike.
Yeah, look, I'll just repeat what Neil said, and I think it is really profound, and it's based deep in Aboriginal law and thinking. That's if you sit on country and respect it and treat it properly and listen to it, it'll tell you what it needs. And I think we're reaching such a critical point at the moment that we've got to stop studying and over postulating and overthinking things. Glenn, I agree with you totally on that stuff. We need to take the action. And we need to we need to plant the trees. We need to fix the mangrove. We need to cut our carbon. And we keep waiting for everyone to come along on that journey, and we don't need to. Like Juunjuwarra sort of was saying to me, "Oh, Mick, we need permission to put our turtle and dugong law in place." I go, "Of course you don't. You own the land. Just activate it. Just turn that switch back on." And your dreaming line still exists. That law will suck back down and activate the consequences and the opportunities that law brings. And we all just, people, one of the biggest challenges for Juunjuwarra was deferring to the masters and getting them to switch that thinking that you are the expert. You are this is your land. You own it freehold, outright. You don't have to keep asking permission from others to get on and do with what you want to do. You just got to start doing it. And it's same with the non-Indigenous mob. Man, we all have wallets full of money. And so many of my friends still haven't changed their super to an ethical fund, you know, and yet sit there worrying about climate change and oil and gas and all those sorts of things. We need to start walking the talk everywhere we can.
Well,
And
thanks, Mike. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And Mary, just any final thoughts? I'm aware we're a little over time, but folks are still here with us.
Only very brief. Even though this is all urbanized here, and one of the first jobs I had when I was growing up was slinging hamburgers in a cafe in Surfers Paradise, you know. And so a whole lot of people have jobs like that kind of stuff. And I'm ashamed to say I even have relatives who run a real estate business, would you believe? Selling land. God. But that kind of thing, we're working also with a group of white middle-class landowners who are quite taken with the idea of making a change to the rules of citizenship so that stewardship becomes a part of it. And Michelle and I, we're both working on, she's the main writer, writing on what that would look like, actually. So taking it to the local government and saying that the only thing that they'll win out of it is they could charge more for rates, I suppose, but that citizens should be like stewards of country. Now, not just their own plot, you know, but all the land around them, across the road and all that kind of stuff. And
what a wonderful note to end it on.
A civilizing kind of thing, that you're not alone in the world. Because I've always thought, no offense meant to anybody, but I've always thought that white fellas generally think they are alone in the world and have behaved like that. You know, that's why the population of the popular thing of colonialism. I'm an individual. I can do what I like. I can sail to another country and make plans to do whatever I want to do there, you know, and so and so. But loneliness, though, too. Loneliness, psychological loneliness. But that's all really. I just think I enjoyed this so much. And look, do I ask permission to use what you've just done, your videos? Can I use it?
Absolutely, Mary.
Is that all right, Glenn? Oh, wonderful. Because we'll have a Wairarka night and show them. You know? Yes.
If you want any more detail, just give us a call.
Oh,
Don't you worry. I'm going to connect all of you. It's going to be fantastic. But Mary, that is a great note to end it on, the loneliness that comes with the disconnection that then can create an economic system that sees people and land as something other than, and something to be used and abused. So what I'd love to do, with just a couple of sentences, what I see in contemporary Indigenous practices on country and anywhere actually is them reshaping and taking the edges off, I think, the nastier sides of Western economics. I think if humans live long enough in this country and climate change doesn't wear us down, the systems that are going to emerge here because of that continuing work, caring for country and building economies out of the people. As Michael said, I always imagine these little flowers, you know, it's like people growing their own capacity and then forming a garden. I think without being romantic about it, that's the hard yakka. That's the work that will change the system itself, because all the localized spaces will be building the stuff that matters. And that's what I hope for. So I'm aware that we're 10 minutes over. It's been wonderful, and I'm definitely going to get you all back for some other sessions, and try to get you all at the NINA conference. So can I give that a quick plug before we go? Just today, if you're on the New Economy Network Australia mailing list, we send out the call for proposals. We're hosting the New Economy Network conference. It's called Pathways to a Thriving World, Ancient Wisdom, Bioregioning, and New Economies. And I deliberately connected with Mary, and we're hosting it on Yugambeh country down at the Gold Coast. So I'm going to be putting my head together with Mary and the Wairarka folks to make sure there's some really important people involved in that conference from your region. So without further ado, I will say a huge thank you, Mary, Mike, Glenn. Thank you for being with us. It's a long commitment out of your busy day, especially since Glenn and myself and others are thinking about cyclone preparation. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your incredible wisdom. Thank you to everyone in our audience. And again, for those of us in the regions that might be affected by these storms, do take care. We're thinking of you all, and look forward to seeing you soon. And if you're interested, we've got another webinar tomorrow at lunchtime, give or take the power going out. Hopefully
Yes,
it'll all be good.
yes. Yeah, see
Thank
you,
you,
bye.
everybody.
See you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, Michelle.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Mary.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.